Hey kids, it's Mr. Little again. Hey, today I'm going to provide you the oral recording for the plasma membrane, something you'll become very familiar with in ninth grade biology. So without further ado, here we go. The plasma membrane defines the borders of the cell and allows the cell to interact with its environment. Cells must be able to control various substances entering and leaving the cell. Cells must also be able to communicate with other cells. To perform these roles, the plasma membrane needs lipids, proteins, and carbohydrates. And you may remember that the plasma or the cell membrane is kind of like the gatekeeper. Its whole function is to allow certain things into the cell and out of the cell, and to keep certain things out of the cell. Lipids, which are part of the lipids, proteins, and carbohydrates, lipids make a semi-permeable barrier between the cell and its environment. Remember, lipids are kind of like the fat part. Proteins are involved in transporting substances through the membrane and cell communication. Carbohydrates, which are the sugars in the sugar chains, help cells recognize each other. The following information is an overview of the plasma membrane structures and their functions. Fluid mosaic model. The currently accepted model for the structure of the plasma membrane is called the fluid mosaic model. This model provides a good basic description of the structure and behavior of membranes in many cells. According to the fluid mosaic model, the plasma membrane is a mosaic of pieces, phospholipids, cholesterol, and proteins that move freely and fluidly. In other words, the membrane is a dynamic structure in which phospholipids and proteins are continually sliding past one another. This fluidity means that if you insert a very fine needle into a cell, the membrane will simply part to flow around the needle. Once the needle is removed, the membrane will flow back together seamlessly. Plasma membrane structure. The main components of the plasma membrane are lipids, phospholipids and cholesterol, proteins, and carbohydrates. Lipids are the first major component of the plasma membrane. Phospholipids are arranged in two layers, referred to as phospholipid bilayer. A phospholipid is made up of a hydrophilic phosphate head and two hydrophobic lipid tails. The head points outward and the tails point inwards. If you look at the diagram here, you can see that hydrophilic heads attract water, whereas hydrophobic tails repel water. So think about phobic as being not wanting something. So in this case, it's repelling the water. And if you look at this image over here, great colored example of the hydrophilic heads right here and the hydrophobic tails that are repelling the water. Cholesterol, another lipid, is found alongside phospholipids. Cholesterol helps maintain the fluid-like nature of the cell membrane, but its most important role is reducing the permeability of the membrane. Proteins are the second major component of plasma membranes. There are two main categories of membrane proteins: integral and peripheral. Proteins play a large role in transporting substances in and out of the cell, which in turn helps maintain the homeostasis of the cell. If you remember, homeostasis means to keep the cell in balance. There is much more to know about the proteins in the plasma membrane, but this is a start. Homeostasis, again, is the tendency of the cell to maintain balance of substances between the outside and the inside of the cell. Integral or intrinsic proteins are proteins that are embedded within the membrane. Some stick only partway into the membrane, while others extend from one side to the other side. These proteins are involved in transporting specific substances throughout the membrane. Peripheral or extrinsic proteins are found on the outside of membranes, attached to either to intrinsic proteins or to phospholipids. They serve as receptors and enzymes and are very loosely attached. Carbohydrates are the final third major component of plasma membranes. In general, they are found on the outside surface of cells and are bound either to proteins or to lipids. These carbohydrates act like identification badges that allow cells to recognize each other. These ID badges are very important in the immune system, allowing immune cells to differentiate between body cells, which they shouldn't attack, and foreign cells or tissues, which they should attack. Think about these gatekeepers or these ID badges as your ID badges that you wear around school. We want you to wear ID badges so that we are aware of who belongs in the school, and if you don't have an ID badge, maybe you don't belong in the school. So a little bit of a synonymous relationship there. Use the link for an interactive plasma membrane review over the construction of the cell membrane. This concludes the oral recording for the plasma membrane.